欢迎大家来到今天的网络讲座我的名字是黄子峰 or Johnny Huang。那我是在这个华埠服务中心的这个经济发展部门的商业顾问。那在我们这个经济发展部门这儿呢，我们是有很多可以帮您实现您这个商业梦想的。那我们第一个计划呢，就是我们这个 Small Business Program，或者我们的这个小型企业辅助计划。那这个计划呢，就可以帮到大家，好像说你要开一个生意啊，不知道应该下一步应该要做到什么啊，应该要拿到哪一些许可证，哪一些保险，应该要做到些什么，我们可以帮你就是 find out 做好。其他的就是好像做这些商业计划、这些财务预测、上这些免费的这些课程，还有我们这些服务完全都是免费的。所以大家如果对这个有兴趣呢，可以帮到你们的生意呢，可以来找我们，我们的电话号码也在这个屏幕的下面。下一个呢就是我们这个 financial empowerment 或者我们的这个个人理财部门。那这个呢，就是可以帮助您提高理财方面的知识比如去帮您做一个生涯规划，也会提供一些课程像怎么可以存款增加您的收入申请一些福利，让您对信用方面就可以更加了解。那我们下一个呢，就是我们的 Vita，我们的免费报税服务。那这个呢，就是通常是如果收入是6万以下呢，就可以等于是低收入的。可是每个人的条件的情况也不一样，所以有些人进来他们的收入是6万块以下的，可是不合格，所以也是要看每一个人的情况的。那如果合格呢，我们也有这个税收抵免，还有这个儿童税收抵免。所以帮你们报税的时候呢，你们如果是合格的呢，那我们也会免费帮你们把这个报上。那下一个呢，就想说一下我们新的一个服务，就是我们的 CSE Lending，我们的自己的贷款服务这个也可以帮到大家，如果需要一些企业资金还是就是5000到5万块的这些资源呢，可以来找我们，我们就可以帮你们做好这个 loan packaging这些全部这些东西都可以帮你们做好。我们的资料也在下面，我把链接呢，大家也放在这个聊天室里头，大家如果对这个有兴趣可以去看看。那下一个呢，就是你们现在上的这个课呢，就是 a part of 我们的这个 ETP program，这个就是帮这些小企业家，就是很多就是重要的这些课程，如果大家来上呢，就可以帮大家就是学到很多，可以帮你们做到一个成功的商业的。那如果我们就是最后2个课呢，就是这个星期四这2个课呢，就是如果大家想申请这2个课，也可以在这个我刚放在这个聊天室里头这个连接。大家如果对于想上这些课呢想去申请呢，请大家就去这个连接上可以把这些课程申请上。那现在呢，我就想说一下我们今天的 rules，我们的 housekeeping。那大家如果有什么问题呢，就可以请大家把它打在这个聊天室里头。我们问完以后呢，上完这个课以后呢，我们就会把这些问题回答上。可是讲员说完东西以后呢，我们会有2分钟到3分钟的时间让大家把这个问答员填上这个只用了2分钟到3分钟，我们就会给大家这个时间去把它填上下一个呢，就是我们今天的照片，就是视频这些东西呢，都会被发到给大家，所以大家就如果会发给大家。然后其他的就是大家，如果你们对我刚才说的这些东西有什么兴趣呢，或者想对今天教的这些东西有什么兴趣，想更去了解一下呢，也可以跟我约个时间，我们就可以1对1来做一下。那现在呢，我就转到我们的这个今天的讲座大家给我1分钟。So right now I'm switching over to the slides for today, and then we're gonna get started.
Right.
Give me 1 sec. Go. Shoot. Slight difficult, but give me 1 sec.
No worries.
Okay, perfect. Share screen. Okay, so I'm gonna introduce you, and then we're gonna get started. Sorry about that.
Alrighty.
So 现在呢，我就想欢迎我们今天的讲员Lucius C Davis，他是从加州的特需经营税务委员会来的，所以我想热烈的欢迎他。Yeah, so just introduce you.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate being here. Thank you to the Chinatown Service Center for the invite this afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you guys so much for being here and looking over this program. It looks like a fantastic program for entrepreneurs and small business owners in your community. So I'm so glad that you guys are taking advantage of that. And yes, my name is Lucius Davis, and I am the Small Business Liaison at the Franchise Tax Board. Now, notice that I said my name rather slowly, Lucius. Now, the reason I do that is because my name is a little different and sometimes a little hard to pronounce. And I've done many, many presentations and many interviews over my career, and I've found that if I don't make sure that you know how to pronounce my name, there's some very interesting variations that come about from it. For example, I've been called everything from loose shoes to licorice and luscious. Well, actually, that last one, I don't quite mind that last one depending on who's saying it. So, like I said, I am from the Franchise Tax Board, and I can just tell you guys are so excited to see me, right? Oh, I can feel it through the computer screen. Well, if not, that's understandable. Usually when I mention them from the Franchise Tax Board, the air gets sucked out of the room and people start shutting down the computers and heading for the exits. But I am here to tell you that we are not all the bearer of bad news. Next slide, please. How many of you out there know that there's a taxpayer rights advocate's office at the Franchise Tax Board? Anybody out there know? Well, I'm here to tell you that there is, and specifically, I'm from the education outreach team and here to talk about the different forms of ownerships or legal structures that you can have in the state of California. You can go ahead and translate if you want to, Johnny.
OK，所以他就是一个很大的一个 welcome，今天就是想谢谢我们这个华埠服务中心请他来说这些今天的讲座。那呢他呢就开始时候呢想就是make sure 大家就可以把他的名字先说对，那他的名字就是 Lucius。这样说他的名字，因为呢，平常呢，他们说他的名字的时候呢，很多人呢就会把他的名字就是拼错说错。那刚才呢，他可能你们大家听到licorice、Lucius、luscious 这些字呢，在英文呢就是跟这个 Lucius 有很相同的，所以呢就很容易把他的名字就是说错，说成这些东西。所以他就是做这个讲座呢，就是做了很多次了。那他就现在知道。一定要让大家知道怎么好好的说他的名字，因为下去呢也有很多这些很有兴趣的这些故事出来，因为每个人都有很多不同的方法可以说他的名字。那他现在就可以继续我们的讲座。
So, a brief background before we get started. Before I started working at the Franchise Tax Board, I was an overseas basketball player for about 13 years. One of those countries I played in was China. And I actually played against Yao Ming. So I was exposed to many different cultures, different mindsets, ways of doing things. After I retired from professional basketball, I became a small business owner for 10 years. So I truly feel with the uniqueness of my background and the uniqueness of my experiences that I definitely can relate to what small business owners go through. And I truly mean that from the start all the way to the finish. From the excitement and anticipation that you feel when you come up with a dream or a vision and you start to pencil it out and you come up with a business plan, to educating yourself and researching on what it really means to be in business, to the joy that you feel when you actually see your dream or your vision become reality, and the pride that you feel when you actually see it be successful and earn a profit. From the highs to the sometimes lows. How things just seem so darn confusing and oftentimes overwhelming. How there just doesn't seem to be enough time in the day to do things in the right way. And this is the big one, at least it was for me. How it seems like everything that comes into the business account goes right back out. And then some. Been there, done that, bought a bag of popcorn and saw the movie. I know how small business owners feel. And you know what? I commend you. I commend you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to attend an event like this, for educating yourself, wanting to do things in the right way, but most importantly, for pursuing your dreams. I know firsthand that it is not easy. So today we are going to be talking about forms of ownership. one of the most important decisions that you have to make as a small business owner is what form of business ownership will best fit your business needs. We're going to be talking about some of the more common forms of ownership, such as sole proprietorships, partnerships, corporations, and limited liability companies. We have a great resource, and it is so great that if we were having this presentation in person, I'd be handing these out to you. This is our publication 1123. This goes over some of the more common forms of ownership, but also some of the less common forms of ownership as well, and all of the filing requirements. It is a great handy dandy resource to have. You can always go to our website at ftb.ca.gov. In the upper right-hand corner, there's a search button. You can type in forms of ownership. A link will pop up and you will be able to access the form there. And I know Johnny already went over the housekeeping. If you have any questions, please save your questions for me until after the presentation, and hopefully we'll have time to be able to answer those. Okay. Next slide, please. And back to you, Johnny.
对，and yeah，大家他就是想先介绍一下他自己。那他呢，就是做这些东西之前呢，他就是在过海，就是海外这些地方打过篮球，就是 professional 的一个打篮球的。那他就是有一个很兴趣的，就是也就是帮中国这个中国队打过篮球的。以前呢也跟姚明一起打过。那他呢，就是从做完这个以后呢，他就是回到美国的时候呢，他就自己开了一个小企业。那开小企业呢，他也开了有10年了。那所以呢，他就是很了解大家今天来到的我们的位置，他就是很了解我们做的这些事，所以他就很理解。然后呢，他就是也很想赞扬大家，因为把大家抽出来这个时间来上今天的课，来学这些东西，那他就是很赞扬大家。然后呢，他也就是想给大家知道，好像说我们开这个小企业的时候呢，有很多时候就是好像我们的钱进来呢，就不用很快，这个钱都完全都要出去了。然后呢，最后呢，就是想给大家一个资源，就是他刚才拿起来那个书呢，就是说他们现在有一个这个新的书，所以每一个就是要做的这些我们要做的这些形式呢，它都可以在这个书里头，大家可以去看看，或者去他们的网站，然后在他们的网站上面有个角一个地方呢，你们就可以把你们想打的那些资料打进去，好像说要开哪一种企业这方面的东西呢，它全部呢跟这个形式有关系的东西呢，它就会出来。Okay.
Really quickly, before we get started in the forms of ownership part of the presentation, there's a few things that the education outreach team would like to emphasize. One of those is the California Earned Income Tax Credit. I know most of you are familiar with the federal Earned Income Tax Credit. Well, there's one for California as well. There's certain qualifications that have to be met. You have to have wages and adjusted gross income within certain limits. You and your family have to have a valid Social Security number or ITIN number, and you have to have lived in California for more than half of the year. If you or someone you know or one of your employees may qualify for this, please send them to our website at ftb.ca.gov for more information, or there's a dedicated Cal EITC website called caleitc4me.org. CalEITC, the number 4me.org. There's some great calculators. You can pop in some numbers to see if you qualify for it. You or someone you know or one of your employees may qualify for it. There may be some real money out there for you. So please do some research on the California Earned Income Tax Credit.
Lucius,
yes.
Just want to double check that website. So I'm going to type it in the chat for everyone. It's a Cal,
CALEITC, the number 4, then me.org.
Okay, and the beginning is CAL, right? Cal?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, and then let me just translate this real quick. So 他现在就是想说一下这个加州这个所得税抵免。那这个呢，就是看那谁可以 qualify， 就谁合格去拿呢？那一定要在加州拿到这个加州的这个人工，或者就是这个个人的这个私人的人工，你们一定要有一个 SSN， 就是那个涉案号码或者一个 ITIN。你们一定要18岁以上的，然后呢，看你们一定要在加州住有多过半年的，然后你们可能应该也一个规定呢，就是看你们有没有小孩子，这个可能要看一下的。那他呢，就刚才说，大家应该要 去我刚才在这个聊天室里头放的这个网站，大家应该去这个地方看看，因为如果你们是合格呢，那可能有很多钱可以拿回来的，所以大家每一个人呢都是应该去这个地方看看，看你们有没有一些钱，是你们可以拿回来的。
Now, as part of the education outreach team, we know that being informed is half the battle. Our most informed clients are the ones that are most compliant. A great way to do that is to visit our fantastic and informative website and to take advantage of the many online services there. We have some great online services such as WebPay, which allows you to electronically pay on your account. Our best online service is establishing a My FTB account. We highly recommend that you do this not only for your personal tax account, but also for your business account as well, because it gives you real-time online access to your account where you can do things such as check to see if there's a balance due, check the status of a refund, check to see which tax returns we have on file for you. You can even answer correspondence. If we send you a notice in the mail, you can answer that through your MyFTB account. And the greatest tool on MyFTB is something called Secure Chat, which allows you to securely chat with someone about your account. And the great thing about that is allows you to avoid having to call in and be on hold for 3 hours before you actually talk to someone. Next slide, please. Back to you.
所以这个最后呢，就也想让大家知道呢，因为他就是在他们的交易外展客户的，他就是在这个部门上，那他们就是知道每一个就是开小企业，知情的这些小企业家呢，就是最成功的，所以他就是介绍大家，还是就是建议大家去他们的这个网站做好一个账户，那每一个小企业的应该有一个税的这个账户，你们就可以用这个来就是看好你们的这个账户，如果有什么新的资料，有什么新的东西出来呢？它就会立刻在你的这个账户实现到，你们就可以看到。所以呀，应该在这个网站做好一个账户。
We also have Tax News. Tax News is a monthly online subscription service that is owned by our shop at the Taxpayer Rights Advocates Office, where we'll have monthly articles that detail any friendly reminders for when tax returns or payments are due, any changes to our policies and procedures, any new state tax laws that might be coming down that might affect you or your small business. It is a great way to stay informed on all things taxes, all things business in the state of California. It is really easy to sign up. If you go to our website at ftb.ca.gov, you navigate to the newsroom section. There's a subscription services link on the left-hand side. You pop in your email address and tax news will come to you once a month, totally free to your email inbox. Back to you. And next slide.
他呢就是说最后一个呢，就是在他们的这个网站还有一个服务，就是税的新闻，basically 这个意思。那大家你们就可以去到这儿呢，你们就可以申请上。那他就会如果申请，你们就把你们的电子邮件放进去啊，那他就会每一个月呢。他们就会发一个好像一个新闻一个报告给大家，那他就会让大家知道，有什么新的变化在这个税里头，然后有什么新的新闻要让大家知道，所以大家如果对这个有兴趣呢，就可以去他们的这个网站这儿，把你们的电子邮件打进去就可以申请上，那就每一个月会拿到一个好像一个报纸，好像如果大家在我们的这个华埠服务中心呢，我们有一个东西叫 newsletter，你们可能每一个星期会收到，就有点像这个的，所以就是有很多这个对于。这个税上的很重要的就是资料新闻都会在这个里头。
And the last thing that the education outreach team would like to emphasize is the gig economy. A lot of people don't understand that when you participate in the gig economy, you may have a filing requirement. There was some recent study that was done by the National Association of the Self-Employed that found that a full 70% of those that participate in the gig economy did not receive any tax information from the platform that they were working for. And that is not good. Back to you and next slide.
最后一个呢，就是他想让大家知道呢，在有一个，如果你们是在这个共享用的这个经济里头呢，那这个经济就是好像说，大家可能听过这个 Uber 啊这些Lyft 这方面的这些东西，或者就是如果租房间，你们可能如果家里有一个 空的房间租给人家，那这个就是这个共享用的这个经济里头。那他们就是发现呢，就是在这个共享用的这个经济里头呢，70%这些人呢，就是在这个经济里头呢都没有收到他们应该就是很重要的这些税的这些资料，所以一定要。So actually, I wanted to double check. So is signing up for the tax newsletter is how they would like, because 70% of the people didn't get the information they should have gotten. Is the fix to that signing up for the
Well, the
newsletter?
fix to that is for them to go to our website, and I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
There's not. There will be some gig economy articles that do come through tax news, but the major fix is to make sure they go to the website so they can get the proper filing requirements. And I'm going to talk about that next slide.
OK，那 so yeah，大家就是70%这些人呢就没有收到，我不知道那是对于他们这个经济里都很重要的这些资料，所以如果怎么可以就是避免这些不好的东西呢？就是去到他们的这个网站，你们就会看到全部应该要知道的这些资料。
So here are some important points to understand if you're participating in the gig economy. The most important thing to understand is what your filing requirements are and to file correctly. Understanding what your filing requirements are very important, so you don't hear from us if you don't. The money you make needs to be reported to the state and the IRS. That is reported on your Schedule C if you are self-employed, which will also be your Schedule CA for California. If you are working multiple jobs from different service apps, all the money you earn must be combined, even if you're splitting time between jobs. So if you're working for Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash, you need to combine all that income together to see if there is a filing requirement. The total money earned is often enough to require you to file. You may be entitled to deductions and credits to help reduce your total tax liability. So if you are deemed self-employed, then you are subject to taking normal and ordinary business expenses to reduce your total tax liability. You can go ahead and translate.
OK，so 大家那就是说，如果你们是在这个经济里头呢，那这个就是几个重点，大家应该要做到的。一呢，就是一定要知道你们的这个如果报税的时候呢，你们的报税要求是什么，然后是怎么去可以把这些报上。二呢，就是你们赚到这个钱呢那当然每个人都知道，这个一定要报给这个国税局，可是也要报给这个国家也要报告的。然后呢，如果你们好像说在很多不同的这些平台上做，好像你们在 Uber 上做，你们在 Lyft 上做，还有你们在这个DoorDash 上做，这三个呢，你们就是要把它这个三个总的这些东西要加起来，然后这样报。然后呢，全部这些呢，就是如果你们在这些很多这些不同的这些平台上做呢，大家就通常是够，你们就是加起来是够，你们是一定要去把这个东西要去报上的。然后呢，你们如果不报呢，你们就可能会没了很多这些就是这些扣除和这些抵免这方面的东西，所以你们一定要去把这些报上，这个就可以帮助减少您的这个纳税义务。
Now, if you or someone you know is participating in the gig economy, please, please, please send them to our website for more information on what their filing requirements are. We have a dedicated gig economy webpage that has a bunch of useful links about your filing requirements. We even have some tax news live videos. Now, I don't know the actor that they got for this video, but the rumor is he's a stand-in for Denzel Washington. He was that good. I don't know who this guy is. Next slide, please. Who is this handsome guy? Oh, look at that. Just kidding, just kidding. If you or someone you know is participating in the gig economy, please, please, please send them to our website at ftb.ca.gov for more information on what their filing requirements may be.
就大家呢，如果你们呢，还是你知道一个人就是在这种经济里头做事呢，那就请大家去到他们的这个网站。那他们的这个网站呢，有很多这些重要的这些资料，一个这个好的这些食品。那他呢，就是刚才这个笑话，就是说他们好像请来的这个人呢，是本来是这个 大家不知道知不知道是谁？这个人叫 Denzel Washington 的一个 substitute。那他的看到这个时候呢，真的就是他，他说这是谁呢？所以这个就是他的刚才那个笑话。那这个网站呢，就是我现在就在这个聊天室里头放进去。大家如果知道一个人在这个经济里头做事的呢，那或者你们如果是在这个经济里头做事的，那就请大家去了这个网站，你们就可以看到很多对于你们这个行业里头很重要的这些资料。
And Johnny, I saw in the chat is ftb.ca.gov.
哦，对
No
不起，
worries.
对不起大家，刚才打错了，是这第二个 FTB 这个，对不起大
Perfect.
家。
All right. So finally, we're now going to move on to the forms of ownership portion of the presentation. And the first form of ownership that we will be discussing is sole proprietorships. Now, if you want to be in business today and you want to be a sole proprietor, then guess what? You would be in business. You would just need to make sure that you have the necessary permits and the necessary licenses for your particular business and your particular location. For example, if I wanted to open up Loose Shoes shoe tightening service, and I had the necessary permits and necessary licenses, such as a business license, seller's permit, building permits, health permits, etc., then I would be good to go. Some great resources on finding out what permits and licenses that you may need for your particular business and your particular location is the California Office of the Small Business Advocate. They have a fantastic website called Cal Gold that can point you in the right direction on what permits and licenses that you may need for your particular business and your particular location and your local small business development centers, or SBDCs. These are some fantastic resources, and the great thing about these resources is that they are usually free. So please, please, please take advantage of those. Next slide, please.
So 大家呢，就是现在就可以开始说我们的这个独子企业。那大家呢，他就是刚才说，如果你们如果已经开始你们这个小企业了，你们这些许可证、这些证书、这些东西都拿好了，那好处就是你们的生意就已经开始了，这是很简单的。那如果大家不知道应该要拿到一些什么许可证呢，哪一些就是证书啊这方面的东西呢？那有一个网站叫 CalGold，is it calgold.gov？
I believe that one, if they go to the California Office of Small Business Advocate, or if they pop in Cal Gold into Google, it'll pop up for them.
OK， so 你们如果去 Google 打进这个 CalGold， 我现在就放在这个聊天室里头呢，你们就可以好好的找到你们应该需要的那些许可证，这些制造这方面的东西。那每一个人住的这些地方、这些社区这些 city 呢，都那些要求不一样的。所以大家如果想 make sure 你们选的这些东西是对的呢，那就请大家去一下这个网站，你们就可以把它选好。
All right, so sole proprietorships are the simplest and least expensive form of business ownership. Why? Because there's no requirement to file any paperwork with the California Secretary of State. Because a separate entity is not being formed with this form of ownership, there's no formal transfer of assets in order to start the business. However, it is highly recommended that you keep the assets of the business separate going forward in order to make it easier to keep accurate records. Having a separate bank account is highly advisable so that you can keep track of exactly what's coming in and what's going out. You want to keep as accurate records as possible, as much documentation as possible, just in case questions arise or unfortunately you get audited. Now, a very important point about sole proprietorships. Because a separate entity is not being formed with this form of ownership, you as the sole proprietor are personally liable for all debts, liabilities, and actions of the business. So for example, if I opened up Loose Shoes shoe tightening service and I got sued because we made someone's shoes much too loose, ha, 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 okay, that was really bad and that was really corny, but there's going to be a lot of corny jokes coming your way, so you might as well just get ready for them because they're coming. Okay, if we got sued, they not only would be able to go after my business assets, but my personal assets would be attachable as well. My home, my car, any investments, any personal tangible property would be attachable as well. And again, because a separate entity is not being formed with this form of ownership, you and your business are basically deemed the same, for income tax purposes. The taxable year of the business will be the same as the taxable year of the owner. Most individuals earn a calendar year for your taxes, so your taxes would be due April the 15th. Back to you, Johnny.
这个呢，就是我们现在就刚才他说了，就是这个个人独子企业的这些特点。那一呢，就是这个独子企业的这个特点呢，就是它很容易开始了，就是你们想开始的时候你就可以开始了。可是它就是没有正式的这个转让我们好像我们的资产这些东西。所以刚才就是说呢，如果做这个生意，就是很大的一个不好的地方呢，就是你们自己的这个商业的这些资产，还有这个个人的这些资产呢是没有分开的。所以如果有一个不好的这个事情发生了，那有人要告大家呢，告你们这个生意呢，那他们就是你们的这个个人的资产，还有你们这个商业的这些资产是没有分开的，所以最后可以把这个你们这些个人的这些东西都可以要赔上的，如果人家要告你。所以呢，通常就是也就是建议大家就是要把这两个东西分开，要做一个不同的这个独立的这个事体。所以就最好通常是不是做这个的，可这个就是最容易的。二呢，就是他说大家做这种生意的时候呢，一定要做好这个我们的这些准确的这些记录。所以好像应该一定要开一个这些商业的这些银行账户，所以这个钱什么时候进，什么时候出，去到哪里，做到什么，就可以做的一个好的记录。然后你们做这个时候呢，因为这个生意跟你个人呢是没有分开的，所以你们报税的时候呢，就是跟这个正常报税的一模一样。所以你们就是企业的这个纳税年度与所有者的纳税年度是相同的。And next slide.
Slide, please. Yep. All right. So a sole proprietor is a business owner that lists all of their income and their expenses on a federal Schedule C. And then that information will be used for your individual tax return for California or your Form 540. So all of the income for the business is being reported and all of the expenses for the business is being reported as well. Expenses such as office supplies, inventory purchases, marketing and advertising, lease expenses, employee salaries, etc., those will all be reported as well. So for loose shoe shoe tightening service, I would list all of my income and my expenses on a federal Schedule C. After filling out that federal Schedule C and a profit is realized, which is what we want, then that profit will be added to any other income on my individual tax return, and then that will be used to calculate my tax liability. Similarly, if I had a loss after filling out that federal Schedule C, then that loss could offset or be subtracted from any other income on my individual tax return, and then that will be used to calculate my tax liability. Another very, very important point about sole proprietorships. A sole proprietor is not an employee. Therefore, a sole proprietor must pay self-employment taxes on self-employment income that is derived from the business. So if Lucius owns loose shoes, that's a bit of a tongue twister. If Lucius owns loose shoes, then he cannot be an employee as well. Lucius must pay self-employment taxes on self-employment derived income because there's no automatic withholding. I know most of you are familiar when you're an employee, when you work for someone and you get your paycheck, there's some automatic deductions that are taken out of it. You have your federal and state income tax withholding, but you also have your Social Security and your Medicare taxes. Those are automatically taken out of your paycheck when you work for someone. Well, as a sole proprietor or a small business owner, when money comes into your account, it just comes into your account. So you must pay self-employment taxes on self-employment derived income in order to pay into the system. So if a sole proprietor cannot be an employee and Lucius withdraws money from his business account in order to pay himself, it will not be deemed a salary. It's just a withdrawal or a draw on that account. Back to you, Johnny.
Give me withdrawal. Okay, so 他呢就是这个就是说，如果我们这个独资企业呢，就是一个就是你们报税的时候呢，你们一定要就是你们独资企业报税的时候呢，就一定要用这个540表来报你们的这个利润或损失。就算你们这些 分红分了没有呢，都是要报的。所以呢，刚才就是说，你们如果好像说你就是你们这个公司你是这个 sole proprietorship，它有一部分呢就是说开这个小企业家呢，就是好像说他如果开了一个生意叫这个 loose shoes，right？那他开的这个生意叫 loose shoes 呢，那他 Lucius 他不是这个公司的一个员工，他是老板 basically。所以如果他把钱拿出来呢，给自己这个人工呢，这个不算是一个人工的费用，这个就算一个。这个算一个，对不起，大家叫 withdraw，意思就是退出。所以如果他把这个钱拿出来给自己呢，不是算人工的，是算一个退出。所以呢，这个通常呢就是做的时候呢，他们就是在你们自己的这个报税单上，他就会把你这个呃赚的这些钱，还有你们这些费用呢，都是加在一起的。好像说你们这些营销啊、买货啊这些东西都加在一起的。那通常这个损失呢，通常是抵消你这个其他的这个收入的。
Next slide, please. The next form of ownership we will be discussing is general partnerships or partnerships. Next slide, please.
现在就说这个普通的这个合伙。
All right, so a partnership consists of 2 or more persons operating a business for profit. It can have an unlimited amount of partners, but it has to have at least 2 to be considered a partnership. So, for example, if Bubba and Lucius wanted to get together to form a business, a partnership that sells and manufactures chewing gum, and they called themselves Bubba Lucius. Okay, did you guys get that? I know it's corny, but I used to be called that back in the day, so I figured I might as well make good use of it and put it in the presentation. So if Bubba and Lucius want to get together and they want to form Bubba Lucius and they have the necessary permits and necessary licenses for their particular business, their particular location, then they would be good to go. Now, a question that often arises with partnerships is, well, hey, what about a husband and wife? Well, they have a choice. They can choose to be a sole proprietor or an owner of a business together, or they can choose to form a partnership. They would just have to figure out what the best fit is for their business needs, and much more importantly, what the best fit is for their relationship needs. So a partnership is a very, very, very flexible form of business ownership. And just like with a sole proprietorship, it is relatively easy to set up because there's no requirement to file any paperwork with the California Secretary of State. The partners themselves decide the organization's structure and the distribution of profit or losses. It is highly recommended this is done with a written agreement or an operating agreement that details exactly how much each partner has invested into the business, how much each partner owns of the business, and how the profit or losses will be distributed. For example, Bubba and Lucius get together and they're like, you know what? We're both in it to win it. We both are going to give maximum effort to this business. We've both invested the same amount of money into this business. You know what? Let's just split this thing up 50-50. Okay, that's relatively straightforward. We'll just detail a written agreement that says that. But what if Bubba's like, I have another business to run and I won't be able to put as much time as you, or I'm going to be traveling a lot and I won't be here as much as you. Or just in general, Lucius is just better looking. Okay, I am just kidding. I was just trying to see if you guys were listening. I am just kidding. So instead of having a partnership of 50-50, we can have a partnership of 60-40. Partnerships are very, very flexible in that way. Back to you, Johnny.
So 这个合伙企业呢，就是如果做这个，就一定是两人合伙合伙的这个人盈利为目的开展业务的，所以一定要多过2个人，可是不可以少过2个人。那多少个人呢？那就怎么样都可以。那这种呢，就是一个很灵活的一个方式来做生意，然后呢，它也挺容易来开始的。然后呢，你们做这个的时候呢，就是做这个生意的时候呢，合伙人就是决定主旨的结构和硬库。那做这个时候呢，他就是建议大家建议前定证实这个书面这个协议分配。 所以就是例子就是好像说为什么灵活呢？就是好像说他Lucius 如果见了一个人叫 Baba，那他们开一个生意叫 Baba Lucius。这个生意呢，那他们如果做这个生意里头，那他们就可以很简单，可以做这个生意，就是我们两个放进来的时间都是一模一样的，那你拿50%，我拿50%，那就很简单。那或者呢，如果说一个人呢，就是说 Bob 了，他没有那么多时间，因为他开其他的这些生意，所以他就不能好像 Lucius 放那么多时间在这个生意里头呢。那他们就可以分好，那说好，OK，你拿40%，我拿60%，那所以呢，做选这种这个试题呢，就是很灵活的。
Next slide, please. All right, so a partnership is considered a pass-through entity, meaning that the partnership's profit passes through to each individual partner, and then each individual partner will report that information on their individual tax return according to the written agreement. So, for example, if the partnership Bubba Lucius had a written agreement of 60-40, that means 60% of the profit will flow through to Lucius. He report that on his individual tax return. 40% of the profit flows through to Bubba, and he reports that on his individual tax return. Now, a general partnership is not a separately taxed entity, meaning that the partnership's profit itself will not be taxed, and there's no requirement to file any paperwork with the California Secretary of State, and it is not subject to the annual minimum tax. Now, a limited partnership or a limited liability partnership, those are separately taxed entities, and there are requirements to file paperwork with the California Secretary of State, and they are subject to the annual minimum tax. For more information on those, please go to our website at ftb.ca.gov or consult our handy dandy resource here, publication 1123, which I like to call our little black book. All right, so how does a partnership report its California income? Well, a partnership will file an information return form 565 in order to report its income. In the process of filling out that form 565, a schedule K1 will be generated for each individual partner, and then each individual partner will take that information and report that on their individual tax return. So, Bubba Lucius had a fantastic year. Through hard work and dedication, they chewed their way to $100,000 in profit. According to the written agreement of 60-40, that means $60,000 of the profit would flow through to Lucius. He would report that on his individual tax return. $40,000 of the profit would flow through to Bubba, and he would report that on his individual tax return. And lastly, just like with a sole proprietorship, each partner is personally liable for all debts, liabilities, and actions of the business. So if you're getting any professional assistance, especially from an insurance specialist, please talk with them about any products like liability insurance that might be able to get you some extra liability protection. Back to you, Johnny.
So 这个就是他们这些特点呢，就是第一个就是它不是一个通过的这个试题，就是好像说呢，你们如果拿到什么收入呢，它是先呢你们在你的这个生意里头拿了什么收入，什么这个就算是利润这方面的这些东西呢，那如果你们好像是刚才说的，你们是60-40的，那40%呢，这个利润是从Baba 那个地方进的，然后60%呢，这个利润呢是从 Lucius 这边进的，所以它是这样分的。可是这个就是一种的这个，可是他们还有一种what was the other one? It's like not a separate taxable entity. The limit, which one was that one called again? The second.
Yes, so it is not a separately taxed entity. So that means, and there's no requirement to file any paperwork with the California Secretary of State, and it's not subject to the annual minimum tax.
OK，所以这个呢，你们如果是做这个呢，你们不用就是不用做什么其他的这些报告的，你们不用报告给这个国务卿啊，你们就不用做这些东西，就是挺容易的所以呢，你们如果做这个呢，你们就是每个人好像 Lucius 和这个Baba，I mean Baba 就是要做这个报告一个信息 汇报，在这个表就是用这个565表去来报告。那报的时候呢，你们就会报你们这个利润或损失在这个表上。那每一个人会有他们自己的这个540表，你们就可以用这个来报。就算你们是有红发啊，还是有利润啊，都一定要报好这个。那这个呢，这个合伙这个呢，就是跟我们刚才说的这个独特企业很一样的。那一样的方式呢，就是好像说你们这些个人的这些资产呢，没有分开的。所以如果有什么事发生呢，如果有什么坏的事要发生，人家要告你，或者你们欠钱还不到啊，这些东西呢，他们都会来追你这个自己的这些资产的，所以没有分开的。所以他就是最后有一个就是意见呢，就是介绍大家就是去申请一些这个责任的就是责任的这种保险，就可以保护到大家多很多。
Slide, please. Now we're going to move on to the most commonly used legal entities. For corporations, that's C corporations and S corporations. And of course, we have limited liability companies, or the much easier to say LLCs. Back to you, and we can go to the next slide.
那就是如果做这个合伙企业，通常呢就会用这两种这个实体，一呢就是 corporation，那就是企业啊或者公司，那二呢就是这个 LLC limited liability company，就是这个有限责任的这种公司，所以我们现在就会继续说一下。
California legal entities, they are formed by filing the appropriate documents or forms with the California Secretary of State. For corporations, you have articles of incorporation that have to be filed. There's various forms that need to be filled out depending on what type of corporation that it is. And you are subject to the annual minimum tax. For limited liability companies, you have articles of organization that have to be filed. That is filed with Form LLC-1, and you are subject to an annual tax and fee. This would be a good place to translate because I'll get a little long after this.
所以如果你们做这个看你们想选这个公司，还是要选这个有限责任这个公司呢？那他们这两个公司有不同的这个方式来就是申请。那如果你们是想做这个公司呢，那你们要做这3个东西。一呢就是这个公司章程，那二呢就是要有很多种的这个形式的。3呢，你们一定要给这个最低的这个税。那你们如果想选上这个有限责任的这个公司呢，那你们就要做好这个主旨章程还要填上这个 LLC 表。最后呢，你们也如果选上这个呢，要给到这个年度税费。
Nope, we want to go back there because I got to get to that last sentence. Okay, so this last sentence at the bottom is very important, and it is so important, I'm going to read it twice. You are taxed annually until formally dissolved or canceled. I'm going to read it again. You are taxed annually until formally, correctly, properly, in the right way dissolved or canceled. Now, the reason I read that twice is because I'm part of a multi-state agency project team that is dealing with the issue of business entities forming, but not dissolving or canceling in the proper way. And when you don't dissolve or cancel in the proper way, you're going to continue to get hit with that $800 minimum tax. Now, if you or someone you know is in this position where they have formed a business entity, but they have not dissolved it, there may be some relief for them. There was some recent legislation that was passed called AB 2503 that now allows for the voluntary dissolution of a business entity. There's certain qualifications that have to be met. It has to have been registered with the California Secretary of State for more than 12 months. It has to have ceased doing business or never conducted business. And the business entity has to have no assets. If you think you can qualify for this, you can go to our website, go to the voluntary dissolution section. There's some applications that need to be filled out. You fill those applications out, send them in. And if you qualify, you can get your total liability plus penalties plus interest abated or taken away. So if you or someone you know is in the position of having formed a business entity but not dissolved it or canceled it in a proper way, please have them look into voluntary dissolution. We have a lot of information on our website so that you can make sure that you dissolve or cancel in the proper way. Back to you.
大家呢，这是最后这个最下面的这个呢，没有这个中文翻译的，可是是很重要很重要的。那它的显示这个意思就是，你会每年呢还是要给这个税的钱，如果你们没有在这个正确的方向取消你们的这个小企业这个实体。所以再想说一次，就是如果你们没有用这个正确的这个方式来取消你们的这个实体呢，你们还是会每年要给这个800块的这个年度税的。所以呢，怎么去取消呢？你们就一定要去自己去看看，因为很多人呢，他们就是会把这个生意开上了，把这个实体选上了，可是 maybe 过了几年呢，可能生意不做了，他们就可能觉得自己就是自动呢，这个生意就会自动取消掉的。可是这个不是这样的，你们一定要用这个正确的方式去把你们这个实体这个生意取消掉。或者你们会一直要给这个每年的这个800块的这个年度税，那怎么去取消呢？你们可以在网上去查一下我刚才放的这个字，就是 voluntary dissolution. Did I spell that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Okay, let's get it. So yeah, 你们就是去把这个选上，然后呢，你们把这个查上呢，那通常呢，你们如果是合格的呢，那他们就可以免费帮你把这些东西都取消掉，好像应该要给的这些费用啊，这个年度税啊，是如果你们过头了已经了，可是你们好像说你忘了去取消，那你们突然间那一年过了有1个月了，你要给这个前年的这个800块的年度税，你们可以去 Google 上啊，他们的网站上啊查到这个 voluntary dissolution。那他们如果你们看到你是合格呢，他就会帮你其他的这些费用、这些东西都帮你取消掉。
The most important, still there. The most important thing from this slide, if you have to dissolve your or cancel your business entity, is to make sure you dissolve or cancel in the proper way. You have to file the proper dissolution paperwork with the California Secretary of State, and then you have to file your final tax return with the Franchise Tax Board and check the box that says final. And if you send it in, even write final across the top.
So 如果做这个的时候呢，就是一定要准确的把这些东西做的是对的。那一个呢，就是你们一定要与国务卿的这个签订适当的解散违建，所以你们一定要把这个东西给到这个 Secretary of State 要填好。二呢，就是一定要把你们对的这个就是最后的这个报税表也要给到他们，然后上面你们要写好 final，就是最后一个报税表给他们。那一定要把这2个做好，才是正确的方式把你们的这个实体取消掉。或者大家我又说一遍，你们还是要把这些钱啊、这些东西啊、这些费用都要给上，那就是不用给的这些钱，所以最好就可以省上，就要省，或者你们要一直给下去，等到你们好好的取消掉，你们就会一直要给到这些钱的。
Okay. Next slide, please. All right, so the next form of ownership that we will be discussing is C corporations. Next slide, please. All right, so a C corporation is a separate legal entity that is owned by its shareholders. What does that mean? A separate legal entity is a business that's given its own individual legal status so that the entity's actions may be deemed separate from the individual owners or shareholders. Before conducting business, and this is true of all other business entities, you must register with the California Secretary of State. It can be costly to maintain and set up. There's certain rules and regulations that a corporation must abide by. For example, drafting the articles of incorporation, drafting bylaws, which is a roadmap to how the business is going to be run. This keeping mandated minutes at mandated meetings. This could be time-consuming, a bit costly, and a bit cumbersome. Now, with a C corporation, you have the option of using an income year or a fiscal year. This may or may not be advantageous to you depending on what type of business that you have. For example, if you have a seasonal business like Halloween costumes, since that's coming up, it may be advantageous to use a fiscal year or an income year instead of a calendar year. If you're getting any professional assistance, please talk to a CPA or an enrolled agent for help in that area. Now, one of the advantages of this business types is that it's basically your liability is limited to just the assets of the business for payment, which is much different from a sole proprietorship and a general partnership. Back to you, Johnny. You're muted. You're muted.
Oops, thank you so much. So 现在就想说一下这个 C 公司的这些特点。那一呢，这个你们如果做这个呢，那它就是一个独立法人的实体，那就是这些股东的买的，就是他们的。那是什么意思呢？就是说你们如果开这个生意呢，那它就是分开的。是从你们这个个人的这个生意和你个人的这些东西，还有你们这个生意呢，它是两个分开的，它就是一个独立的法人的实体。所以如果做这样呢，可能也安全很多给大家。那二呢，如果你们要做这个呢，你们就一定要开展业务前呢，必须向这个 SOS 的这个地方注册。然后呢，如果你们是想做这个呢，你们也一定要就是你们要去这个国务卿这个地方，要把它申请上这个 Secretary of State。那做好这个以后呢，它可能也是就是设置和维护这个成本可能会很高的。那最后呢，大家如果做这种企业呢，你们有这个 option 可以选是收入年度的呢，还是用这个日历年的来就是算你们的税。那如果做一个例子呢，就是看你们这个生意如果是看这个节日来做的，那好像说这个鬼节因为快到了嘛，如果你们是做这个鬼节的呢，那你们可能会想选这个收入年度的方式来做这个税的。
Next slide, please. All right, so how does a C corporation file and pay its California taxes? Well, a C corporation will file their taxes using Form 100. One of the disadvantages of this business types is that it's basically taxed on two levels. It is taxed at the entity level at 8.84% on the net income, and then when the dividends are distributed to each individual shareholder on their individual tax return. However, shareholders may not deduct any losses for the corporation on their individual tax return. Now, we briefly talked about this before, but corporations are subject to the $800 minimum tax. And this means whether your business is profitable or not, the minimum tax you're going to pay is $800. Now, this is due the 15th day of the fourth month of the corporation's taxable year, and it is due whether you are active, inactive, operating at a loss, hiding behind a tree, chewing bubblicious. Basically, if you exist, the minimum tax you're going to pay is $800. Now, the only caveat to that, and I guess this is the state of California's way of trying to be business friendly, ha ha ha. The only caveat to that is for newly formed corporations, the minimum tax is waived for the corporation's first taxable year. But it's just the minimum that is waived, not the fact that you have to file and pay taxes. I know some of you are familiar when you first start out a business, there's a lot of investment into that business, a lot of expenses for that business. After you fill out that tax form that first year and it shows that you have zero tax liability, well, in that first year, you have zero tax liability. But in that second year, if things are still not going the way that you want them to, you fill out that tax form and it shows that you have zero tax liability, the minimum tax you're going to pay from that second year on is $800. Back to you.
OK，所以你们如果想做这种S 公司这个 C 公司的时候呢，你们一定要用这个100表来做的。那做的时候呢，它就是看你们每年的这个收入来算你们的税的，那就是用你们的这个收入8.84的这个8.84%来算这个税。那怎么样呢？大家你们都一定要给到这个800块的这个年度税。所以就算你们什么都没做到，什么都不做你们怎么样？就是生意如果是开的呢，你们一定要给他这个800块的这个税。那如果只是看加州呢，加州有一个特点就是。Actually, so for the first year of the 800 minimum tax being waived, is there a caveat to it, or is it just if it's the first year?
No, so your first taxable year. So from the date that you register for that first taxable year, the $800 minimum tax is waived.
OK， 所以在加州呢，如果你们开这种 C 公司呢的第一年呢，在加州你们不用给这个800块的这个年度税的，那这个就是在加州开生意的一个好处啦。那最后呢，就是 股东就分配的股息纳税。OK，就是用这个来做的。
Next slide, please. The next form of ownership that we will be discussing is S corporations. Next slide, please. Now, S corporations are very, very similar to C corporations. There are just a few variations and limitations to them. Like a C corporation, it is a separate legal entity that is owned by its shareholders. Also, like a C corporation and all other business entities, you must register with the California Secretary of State before conducting business. And in order to be an S corporation, you have to elect to be an S corporation by filing the appropriate form with the IRS, that is Form 2553. Back to you, Johnny, and next slide.
So 大家如果你们就是下一个呢，就是除了 C 公司呢，我们可以选到一个公司，就是这个 S 公司的。那如果想选这个 S 公司呢，就是这个也是一个有股东拥有的独立法人实体。那如果想做这个呢，你们就是好像刚才那个 C 公司一样，一定要跟这个 SOS 的这个地方申请上，才能做到这个生意的。然后如果要变成一个 C 公司呢，你们是一定要选上的，你们一定要选择这个 S 公司的这个地位的，所以一定要选上，你们才可以变成一个 S 公司的。那做这个呢，你们就是选上的时候呢，也要根据这个 Secretary of State 或者这个国务卿去把这个东西要报告去申请上的。
Some of the differences between a C corporation and an S corporation. With an S corporation, you can have up to 100 shareholders versus a C corporation where you can have an unlimited amount of shareholders. With an S corporation, there's only allowed one class of stock versus a C corporation where you can have various classes of stock. And shareholders of an S corporation can only be individuals, estates, or certain trusts, versus a C corporation where you can actually have another corporation or an LLC be a shareholder. Back to you, and next slide.
So 如果做这个呢，它的这些特点呢，就是一，它不能有多过100个股东；二，它就是只能有一种这个股票的；三呢，就是这个股东只能是个人的这个遗产或某些信托。
All right, so with an S corporation, similar to a sole proprietorship and similar to a partnership, profit or losses passes through to each individual shareholder, whether the dividends are distributed or not. Now, for the entity itself, an S corporation does not pay federal income taxes. But of course, state of California, they want their piece of the action. So an S corporation is taxed annually at a rate of 1.5% on the net income, and they will file their taxes using Form 100S. So if Bubba Lucius Chewing Gum had elected to be an S corporation and we made $100,000 in profit, then we would be taxed annually at a rate of 1.5% or $1,500. And then the rest of it would be distributed to both Bubba and I, and we will report that on our individual tax return. And of course, it is also subject to the $800 minimum tax. Back to you, and next slide.
So 它下一个的这些特点呢，就是一，它是一个混合商业实体的；二呢，如果报这个的时候呢，也要用这个100S 表来报。然后呢，如果做这个 S corporation 呢，你们不一定要给这个联邦税的，所以你们不用给这个联邦税，可是一定要给好像这个州的税，那它就是要给1.5%这个税，那怎么样也要给这个800块的这个年度税，800块。然后呢，我们的这些股东呢，就是一定要报告他们的利润或损失在他们个人的这个540表上，就算那个红分了还是没分了呢，怎么样都要把这个报上的。
All right, and thankfully, the last form of ownership that we will be discussing is limited liability companies, or LLCs. Next slide. Okay, so an LLC is an entity formed under state law by filing articles of organization. It is a separate legal entity that is owned by its members, and because of that, and it's noted in its name, there is some limit to the liability of the members. Generally, creditors may only go after what each member has invested into the business. Similar to a corporation and all other business entities, you must register with the California Secretary of State before conducting business. It is considered a hybrid business entity because it takes characteristics from different forms of ownership, and we're going to talk about that in the next slide. And restrictions may apply to professional services that require a license, certification, or registration. Next slide, and back to you.
这个现在说的这个就是我们最后今天要说的这个字体。那一呢，这个就是我们这个 LLC， 我们这个有限责任的这种公司。那做这个呢，它就是由会员拥有的独立法人实体。所以呢，如果做这个呢，大家一定也要申请用这个 SOS 大家要申请上才能做到这个生意的。它也是一个混合型的这个商业实体。那说它的时候呢，它就是有限的这种责任的这种公司，所以呢，它就是不会追你们这些个人的这些财产这方面的东西。可是如果你们做这个公司呢，你们突然间是欠钱呢，还是什么呢？如果他们来追你的这些东西时候呢，他们只会追投资者放进去的这些东西，就是你投资了多少东西在这个公司里头呢，他们只会追这部分，不会追你们就是另外就是私人个人的这些方面的这些东西。然后他下面也会再继续说一下。就是如果你是做一个生意，就是一种专业的这种服务呢，需要这些许可证、这些证书这些方面的，你们可能会有什么限制的？那现在他就会可能准备去说一下。
All right, so this is where we'll get into what an LLC actually is. So an LLC is treated as a partnership if it has 2 or more members. And in this case, it would generally follow the partnership rules in the way that it conducts business. So Bubba Lucius LLC, with both Bubba and I as members, we would generally follow the partnership rules. And you guys remember that, right? So instead of filing a Form 565, we would file a Form 568 for the LLC. In the process of filling out that Form 568, a Schedule K-1 will be generated for both Bubba and I, and we would take that information and report that on our individual tax return. An LLC that only has 1 member would be considered disregarded for federal income tax purposes. So if it was just me as a member, or if Bubba was actually a Bubette and we were married, we would be considered a single member LLC or SMLLC. Then we would generally follow the sole proprietorship rules. You guys remember that, right? So we would file a Form 568 for the LLC, but it would just be an informational return. We wouldn't have to deal with any Schedule K-1s. And then just like a normal sole proprietor, we would list all of our income and our expenses on a federal Schedule C. After filling out that federal Schedule C, if a profit or loss was realized, then we would add or subtract that to any other income on our individual tax return, and then that will be used to calculate our tax liability. Lastly, a little more complicated, LLCs can elect to be treated as a corporation. In order to do that, they have to file the appropriate form with the IRS, that is Form 8832, and then they would generally proceed as a corporation would. Back to you, and next slide.
So 这些 LLC 的这些特点呢，就是有很多不同这个方式，你们去可以报税时候做的。一呢，如果大家就是选择就是做这个，好像刚才说的时候，这个合伙企业的呢，那它就是根据这个国税局的这个合伙企业分类，那就是要根据它这个合伙企业的这个规则来报税的。那就是说，本来呢，你们如果要报这个565表的时候呢，你们如果变成一个 LLC 这个 corporation 方面的呢，你们也要把这个568的这个表要申请上。那如果你们是选择做这个个人的这个 LLC 呢，那你们就是一定要根据这个个人的这些分类来做，那你们就是要根据这个个体经营者的规则来做。所以你们如果做这个的时候呢，你们一定要把这个568的这个表也要申请上，然后也跟这个个人的这个sole proprietor 这样的方式就是一模一样的。所以你们做的时候呢，你们要把全部的这个收入和费用都要填在上面。然后最后呢，就是我们这个 IRS Corporation，就是如果你们根据这种分类呢，你们就是一定要 遵循这个公司的规则，然后根据他这样的方式来做。所以每一个呢，你们看你们如果选择这个合伙的呢，还是这个个人的呢，还是就是这个 IRS 就是 corporation，所以都是有不同的方式。然后最后呢，他刚才说的就是，如果你们就是做这个有限责任的这种公司呢，你们也可以选。就是给税的时候啊，就是看那个国税局是怎么看你们的，是怎么分类你们的呢？你们就可以选，OK，我想你们把我们当成一个corporation 一种公司，不要把我们当成就是一个 LLC，所以可以这样去做的。
All right, so a quick recap of that because I know we're running out of time. So, a single member or partnership classified LLC will file their taxes using Form 568. It is also subject to an $800 annual tax, and it may be subject to an annual fee depending on the total income. So it's basically taxed on two levels. It is taxed at the entity level with the annual tax and possible fee, and then when the profit or losses passes through to each individual member on their individual tax return. Now, there was a major update dealing with the $800 annual tax. There was some recent legislation that was passed, AB 85, that now allows for the $800 annual tax to be waived for an LLC's first taxable year to match what is done for corporations. This only applies, though, for LLCs that were formed on or after January 1 of 2021. So if you formed your LLC on or after that date, or even this year, the $800 annual tax is waived for your first taxable year. Back to you, Johnny, and next slide.
这个呢，就是如果你们是一个这种呢，就是如果是个人的这种来报这个 LLC 呢，那你们就一定要用这个568表报。那怎么样呢？也要给这个年度税800块啦。然后呢，你们报这个税的时候呢，这是有两种方式，要有两个过程的。一呢，就是有这个 pass through tax，这个就是转加税，所以呢，它就就是你们的利润会。过了你们这个生意以后呢，就转到你们这个个人上面，然后个人上面也要把这个税要给上。二呢，就是要给这个年度税，就这个800块的这个年度税。那如果好像我们刚才说了，如果你们是开了没有一年呢，就是第一年做这个 corporation 的时候呢，你们第一年呢在加州这个年度税是不用给的。那最后呢，就是会员呢，就是怎么样都要把他们那部分的这个利润或损失呢，一定要在那个540上报告给的，所以就算有红发还是没有红发呢，怎么样都要把它报上的。
Right. LLCs classified as a C corporation will file their taxes using Form 100. Just like a normal C corporation, they're taxed annually at a rate of 8.84% on the net income. Then they are subject to the $800 minimum tax. And then members will receive their share of profit just like a normal C corporation shareholder would. Back to you, Johnny. And next slide.
So yeah, C corporation 这个 C 公司呢，就是如果做这个的时候，你们就是选 LLC，你们想选要用 C corporation 来就是看你们的呢，那你们用这个100表来报。那这个呢，就是每年就是看你们这个收入来给税的，那就是在这个8.84%，在你们的这个每年的这个收入来给这个税。那跟每一个呢就是一样，如果做这个 corporation 要给这个最少要给这个800块的年度税。然后呢，会员呢怎么样？如果收到的那些利润或损失呢，就像一个 C corporation 一样的，C corporation 这个股东一样的。
And LLCs classified as an S corporation will file their taxes using Form 100S. Like a normal S corporation, they're taxed annually at a rate of 1.5% on the net income. They are also subject to the $800 minimum tax, and members will receive their share of profit or losses just like a normal S corporation shareholder would. Back to you, Johnny. Next slide.
So S corporation 就是如果你们就是做这个有限责任的这个公司想当 S corporation 这方面的呢，那你们一定要用这个100S 表来报。然后呢，这个呢就是给税你们就可以给少一点。那它就是因为你们不用给这个联邦税，你们只用给这个州的这个税，就是1.5%。那就是好像全部刚才那些一样， 怎么样都要给这个800块的这个年度税。然后每一个这个会员呢，一定要把他们的这个利润或损失呢，在这个540表上报告，就算红发了没发怎么样，就是好像刚才那些一样，都要把它在这个表上报上的。
And really quickly, I wanted to point out in the back of our little black book, on the back of that, on our website, there is a handy dandy chart that I hope all of you will go and print it out. It is a nice resource to have. You can highlight what form of ownership that you have, whether it's sole proprietorship or partnership, corporation or limited liability company. Then you can see which tax form you're going to have to file, when it's due, what your tax rates are. It is a great, great handy resource to have for all of our prospective small business owners. So please go to our website and get that chart. Back to you, and next slide.
所以它就是最后呢，就是这些重要的这些资料，在他刚才拿起来这个书上呢，在最后面你们可以看到这些资料，或者如果你需要他们的这个网站呢，你们也可以看到。所以大家如果今天说的这些东西有什么就是不懂的这些地方，或者我们刚才说的这些全部这些资料呢，都在放在这个表格上，就很简单，就可以把它们一个一个就是 compare 一下，看哪个可能对你们好一点。
And thankfully, that concludes our presentation on forms of ownership. Thank you guys so much for your time and listening about me and Bubba. If you would like more information, please go to our website at ftb.ca.gov. Or if you have any questions after this event, next slide, please. You can actually send me an email. We have a dedicated small business liaison email ID, and that is at ftb small business liaison at ftb.ca.gov. Again, ftb small business liaison, all one word, at ftb.ca.gov. Thank you guys so much, and thank you, Johnny, for all that talking and translating. You did great.
Thank you. 所以大家他就是如果对于你今天有什么问题呢，你们就可以在这个 email 上我跟他直接的问这些问题我现在就把它放在这个聊天室里头。So I think we can still do some Q&A. We actually have some good questions
Okay.
I have gotten to, but I'm going to put the survey in the chat so everyone can also get a chance to fill that out. So 大家，我现在在这个聊天室里头呢放了这个问答员，请大家把它填上。今天呢我可能就不用给大家2分钟到3分钟来填这个表，因为我们已经过了很多时间了，我们还是有几个很重要的问题想问一下，所以大家我就先问这些问题，就不给大家这2分钟3分钟了，就请大家 please 就去把它填上，会帮到我们的这个 program， 还有帮到我们以后的这些问答，我们以后的这些讲座。Okay, so first question I have, it's actually from me. So with the $800 minimum tax,
Yes.
That's not like it's not like set in stone, right? I'm just curious how the minimum tax is calculated, or what's that?
So if you fill out your tax form and it says that you owe $1,600,
yeah,
that $800 minimum tax is subtracted from that. So it wouldn't be $1,600 plus the $800 minimum tax. It's a minimum tax, meaning if you were in like the example I gave you, if you were in business and the tax form showed 0, but you're in your second year, the minimum you're going to pay is $800. But it's not going to be added to any other tax that you have. So if you have your total tax is $1,000 for that year, $800 will be paid in the minimum tax, and then you pay $200 that will be left.
Okay, I get you. Okay, so 我刚才问的就是我们就是看到很多不同的这些公司就是有一个年度税好像是800块的，那我就是问了一下 Lucius， 这个800块这个年度税，因为他刚才说的是不是一个固定的号码的，有时候会变的，那我就是看是什么条件这个号码才会变的，那就是说如果你每年要欠的这个税呢，好像最多是0呢。如果是0呢，那你不用 Wait, if it's 0, you don't need to pay the 800, right?
If it's 0, you do need to pay the $800.
Oh, sorry.
And that's what the minimum means. That's why they put it as a minimum tax. You're going to pay each year. The minimum tax you're going to pay is $800.
Okay.
For every taxable year except for the first one. After that first one, every other year, the minimum you're going to pay is $800. If you only owe $400, the minimum you're going to pay is $800.
Okay, so 如果你们什么都不欠的，有点复杂。如果你们什么都不欠，就是0呢，怎么样都要给800块。如果你们好像欠 1000块呢，那你们只用给200在那边，可是还是要给800块在这个年度税上。And so I'm asking like another, it's still the same thing. So if you don't owe 0, you owe 1,000. You're putting 800 on the minimum side and 200 on the actual side.
Yes.
Okay.
So, and it's a definition of language thing. For corporations, they put it as a minimum tax so that corporations know the minimum tax they're going to pay is 800. Now, if their tax liability is 1,000, 800 is already taken care of it in the minimum part of it, and then you have the 200 that's left over.
Okay. So yeah，刚才说的是对的。如果你们好像说1000的，那你们的应纳税额呢是1000块，那800块就会把这个1000块补上了。那最后你们要给的呢就是那个200块。所以你们怎么样都要给那个800块的。So，如果你们好像总共欠的是1200啊、1500啊，如果是1200，你们给了那个800块以后呢，你们只欠400。And the second question is it possible to register a company within 1 day? I saw it in an advertisement.
No, and please be careful, especially please tell this community to please be careful on who you believe and who reaches out to you. There unfortunately is a lot of scams and fraud that we're dealing with at the state level and as well as the federal level. The only way to do it is to go through the California Secretary of State. Now, you can have someone do it for you, but the only way to register your corporation or your LLC is through the California Secretary of State. So it is not possible to register one of those in 1 day because the California Secretary of State, there's a process that they need to register your business. When you apply to register, you can do it online. They'll send you a notification. Usually it's within a few business days when your business is registered.
就刚才那个问题呢，就是这个有人问有没有可能就是可以一天就把这个整个公司做好？那 Lucius 就是说不可能的，所以也就是叫我让大家知道，就是在我们这个社区里头呢，请大家小心一点。因为现在有很多就是诈骗的这些人呢，可能会给你说，嘿一天可以帮你把这个生意做好我们今天就可以帮你把这些东西都完成上你们就请我来帮你们做这个事，那就请大家要小心一点不要那么容易相信这些人，因为有很多人就是用这些方式来骗大家，所以大家如果就是想开生意呢，那你们不知道应该怎么办，你们也可以来找我我就可以帮你们去把这些东西做好，怎么样？我们的服务也是免费的，so yeah，就是最好不要乱相信大家说的这些东西，因为有很多人现在做这些诈骗方式的东西。下一个呢，就是问题就是 so the next question is a bit I think we've gone over it already. Maybe you could briefly answer it again. What's the difference between a corporation and an LLC?
Well, there's a bunch of differences there, and that's kind of what we kind of walk through in the presentation. But a corporation, you're going to have certain rules and regulations that you're going to have to abide by. With LLCs, you don't have that. With both of them, you have entity protection. So as a sole proprietor or a general partnership, that business does not have entity protection, so they can go after your personal assets. With a corporation or a limited liability company, those are separate entities, so they only go after the business assets. Corporations pay an $800 minimum tax, meaning the minimum that you're going to pay is $800. LLCs pay an $800 annual tax, meaning each taxable year you're going to pay $800 for the LLC.
所以刚才那个问题呢，就是一个公司和一个有限公司是有什么不同？那我们刚才就是说了很多，它就是有很多方面不同的，他们的这些规则怎么申请这方面呢就是很不同。可是如果跟这个个人的这个生意呢，好像说这个公司和这个有限公司呢，这两个呢就是一个呢，就是如果你们的资产呢是有分开的，如果你们做公司和这些有限责任的这些公司；二呢，就是有限责任公司呢每年怎么样都要给这个800块的这个税的这个钱。可是如果你们只是做这个 corporation 这个公司呢，每年呢它会怎么样都要给这个800块的这个税的钱。可是如果你们好像刚才说总共要给的这个税的钱是1200呢，你们怎么样都要给这个800块。可是这个800块呢会在这个1200上面扣了。所以你们只用多给这个400块，可是如果是 LLC 呢，你们一年要给这个 可能如果要给的这个税是1200，那你要把这个1200给了，还要给这个800块的这个钱，所以他们这个分币呢就是在这儿。And do have some other questions. So one was shoot, I forgot to write it here. If you guys what was it? If you run, like, let's just say if you're running a e-commerce store, and then you can automatically open a store as like a sole proprietorship, when you register for everything. But is it worth it in your opinion to open it as an LLC or things like what kind of risk comes with
So
e-commerce?
in my capacity as a small business liaison, I'm not allowed to give advice, just provide information. But what I will say is when you have a business, the thing that you have to decide is there a possibility for any litigation? Is there a possibility for there to be any kind of liability? Usually with e-commerce, there's usually not that much. So if it's not going to be that much litigation, liability tied to it, you might not need to get that extra entity protection having an LLC or corporation. What comes with that extra entity protection is that $800 minimum tax or $800 annual tax that you have to pay every year. And as a small business owner, I was a small business owner. It doesn't matter how much money you make, writing that check hurts. So if you're not going to have the liability issues, not going to have the litigation issues, you might want to be looking at, getting something like a sole proprietorship or a partnership instead of a corporation or a limited liability company.
OK，所以刚才就说嘛，如果我们在网上做一个生意呢，那通常就是一开这个生意，那就是已经是一个独资企业了。那有没有可能，或者为什么呢？我应该也要开一个有限责任的这个公司？那有什么情况下？那个 Lucius 刚才说呢，他做这个位置是不可以给大家说，哦，你应该做这个，你应该做那个，他只是给大家一些资料。可是可以说的呢，就是如果你们开这个网上这个生意呢，你们有时候要想一下。有多少可能性有一个人会告你，有这样的事会发生？那做这个网上这个生意可能性就少一点。可是呢，最后大家也要想一下，就是好处就是，万一有人要告你们呢，这个个人的有限责任的这个公司呢，就可以保护到大家。The next one is, so if you're opening an e-commerce store, but you already have an existing business under an LLC, is it okay to still do it under the same LLC? So let's just say you have a restaurant and it's under an LLC, then you want to open up an e-commerce store. And then I guess you don't want to file for another LLC. Is it safe to just do the e-commerce store under the same LLC?
Yes, that is possible. You just need to make sure that you have the necessary permits and licenses that you need for that particular business. So for e-commerce, because that's a little different, a lot of people there operate that out of their house. A good resource is the California Office of Small Business Advocate. They have some how-to guides on certain different business types. E-commerce is one of those, and they can walk you through exactly what you need with your permits and licenses. Because if you have to get a business license, then you might have to get a doing business as. So if you get a doing business as, that can be under that LLC. It's just like if I had an LLC, but then I was a single member LLC, but I had 2 locations under that LLC. And so the same thing would apply here if you have, a physical one and an e-commerce one as well.
Okay. So 刚才问的呢，就是如果好像有些客户呢，还是就是有人，如果你们是已经有一个有限公司了，有限责任公司了，那你们还想开一个其他家的一个生意，好像说你们有一个餐馆，那你想开一间就是在网上卖东西的这个生意，那可不可以2个都放在一样的 LLC 上？他说是可以，可是有时候要看就是你们的这些 risk 这些线的这些地方，因为他们2个做的这个生意是不一样的。因为你们如果做就是网上这个生意呢，通常是在家里做的，所以呢，你们就是要看你们把全部的这些许可证、这些证书都拿好，再往前走做。So that was a lot of questions. I do have one more question.
That's fine. We got a little time.
So thank you. And which form of ownership is most suitable for a small business with so let's just say a retail store? Or like something like that. So which form of ownership is most suitable for a small business with limited capital and resources?
Well, so that starts to trickle a little into the advice category. But I will say, if having a small retail store is not going to be open to litigation, if it's something that's something you probably want to talk to a tax professional about, because if it's not going to be open to any kind of litigation liability, then you can maybe operate as a sole proprietorship or a partnership, as long as you get some liability protection using liability insurance.
Okay.
If it is a retail store where somebody might come in and might slip and fall, where you offer food, where somebody could choke, then you might want to look into being a separate legal entity so that your personal assets will not be subject to that liability. So it just depends on the exposure of that business.
Okay, so 刚才这个也是最后一个问题呢，就是问了 Lucius，就是如果我是开一个小企业的，好像一个小铺头啊，就是这样的，还是餐馆啊，whatever，right？你们如果开这样的生意呢，那我应该选哪一种结构？如果我的这个资金和资源是有限的，那Lucius 刚才说呢，就是选这个时候呢，他也不能给大家这个 advice，他只能给资料。可是说呢，就是大家就是好像刚才说的，就是要想一下可能性，人家会告你呢是有多高，你们就要想一下这部分。如果不是那么高的呢，那你们可以想就去做这个个人的这个私人的这个 sole proprietorship，那你们就买这个买这个责任保险。可是如果好像说你们开这个生意，人家有可能进来，可能可以滑下来啊，弄伤自己啊，那你们可能就最好还是做这个有限责任的这种公司。OK，so 问题我现在都问好这个 Lucius 了，现在就会谢谢一下他。So yeah, I just that was the last question. I let them know that was the last question, and right now I just wanted to thank you. Today was just such a wonderful presentation. The amount of information you shared was just really great, really valuable, and I'm sure all the attendees today got a lot of valuable insights from you. So I just want to thank you again for a wonderful presentation.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for those kind words, and it was my pleasure being here with this community. Best of luck to all of you in your business endeavors, and I am just an email away if you have any questions.
And yes, 谢谢大家我们来参加我们今天的网络讲座，我们今天的网络讲座也说到这了，谢谢大家。Thank you, Lucius, again. The workshop's going to end now. Thank you.
Thank you.